Hello again. As you know, I am Eli the computer guy, and yes, it is true. It is in fact true. We are doing a class again. I've been promising you guys this for like a year. I've been putting those little classes right in front of your nose and then saying no, not gonna do it. But yes, in fact, we are back to doing classes. Eli the computer guy, the YouTube channel is pure class, and if you want to go see vloggy type stuff or me in the raw, go over to the YouTube channel Eli Computer Guy Live. But here we are doing classes. And today I want to talk to you guys about hybrid cloud infrastructure. This is an introduction class to hybrid cloud infrastructure, and this is absolutely awesome. This is I'm not even sure it's really the future. I would argue it is the now. This is the now that helps you migrate to cloud infrastructure in the future. It is absolutely awesome. Basically, what we're talking about when we talk about hybrid cloud infrastructure is where your corporate infrastructure, your corporate IT infrastructure resides both locally and in the cloud. And what is most important about this is that basically it seamlessly connects. So in the past, you used to have local infrastructure, and then with AWS and Azure and some of these other services that came out, you had cloud infrastructure. But there were two basically entirely different things. If you were in the corporate world, you dealt with local infrastructure. You had your local Active Directory servers and your local database servers and your local all that kind of stuff. And then if you were doing a startup company, you were starting the next Instagram or Facebook or something like that, you would have cloud infrastructure, right? So everything would be up in the cloud. But basically there were two entirely different types of infrastructure. They were really great. They were really amazing. But again, corporate was here, startup was here, and they really didn't meet. Now some really smart people, they would go out there and they would kind of duct tape solutions together in order to get your local infrastructure to talk with the cloud infrastructure. But that was really duct taping it together. It was like, yeah, it works. Yeah. If somebody sneezes, I'm not really sure what's going to happen there, but it works. The cool thing now is, especially with AWS, with Amazon Web Services, or with Microsoft Azure, or even with VMware, their what is it called? vCloud Air solution. They now have this hybrid cloud infrastructure where your infrastructure seamlessly is local and in the cloud and can communicate with each other with no big deal. Basically, think of it this way, as if your cloud, so your cloud infrastructure, is simply a site for your local infrastructure. So your cloud infrastructure is no different than another building or another office in your company. You have to set up, routing protocols and security and all that kind of stuff. But basically, it seamlessly connects together. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, this hybrid cloud infrastructure, because this is one of those things that is rock solid stable now. Not a lot of people are deploying it yet on a large scale. I mean, yes, a lot of people, but percentage-wise, not a lot of people are deploying it, but this is something that you should be looking at, because now with this hybrid cloud infrastructure, what you can do is you can offload servers and services, low-value servers and services, up to the cloud, let the cloud deal with it very easily, while retaining all of the security and compliance issues you need to with local servers. And then what you can do is you can slowly start migrating everything over. So, there's a lot of question nowadays. Should we migrate to the cloud? Eli, should we migrate to the cloud? See, when you say to the cloud, what that means is that's a yes, no, either or thing. Do we have a local infrastructure or do we have cloud infrastructure? And so if you say, Eli, should we migrate to the cloud right now? I'll probably scratch my head and say, no. What? Take all of your servers, take all of your services and put them up to the cloud? Only if you want to be bleeding edge, you only want to be cutting edge. But if you can have a hybrid infrastructure and you say, Eli, should we move a database server to the cloud? Should we move our IIS server to the cloud? Should we move a couple of these things to the cloud so that they can provide better services for our global workforce? Then you say, yeah, keep your Active Directory local, move some of these things up to the cloud, and that's the way to go, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, with this whole hybrid cloud infrastructure. Absolutely awesome, absolutely wonderful. Again, if you are not deploying this right now, you need to research this, because you need to start. This is one of those things you should start on this migration path, I would argue, within the next year or so, because We'll go over it. It just makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. It really is robust. It really is rock solid. And there's not a lot of reason not to. So that's a class we're going to be talking about today. Give me a second and we'll jump right in. So in order to understand the future and understand where we're at now, we have to understand the past a little bit. So let's go over how infrastructure worked up until now. So the original infrastructure, essentially, was the client-server infrastructure. So you had client computers and you had servers, essentially local, and that they would talk to each other. So you have one building, let's say you have one building, all the computers in the building are networked to each other and networked to the server. So whenever they need a service from the server, whenever they need information from the server, all of that traffic is routed internally. Past that, they started coming up with what are called WANs, so that's the LAN. Then you have WANs, which are wide area networks. When you have a WAN, basically what you're doing is you're connecting multiple buildings into the same network. So maybe now you have a campus facility, so a computer in a different building can talk to a server here, right? So that's how the client-server infrastructure worked before. Essentially, all of the computers and servers were physically tied to each other. Past that, there were issues with that. This was a good thing, but things always change. And basically, what companies came up with, major companies came up with, was web services. So the thinking is instead of having a local server that provides all these services for all the local computers, what if we create servers on the internet that can then provide services to basically any computer that can connect to them on the internet? So instead of one server being able to supply information or services for 100 computers, it can now supply services for 1 million computers. And so when you start looking at web services, these web services are things like Hotmail or Gmail. Think about email servers. So you can have an Exchange. Exchange is a local email server, but that only supports the local email clients. Well, with Hotmail or Gmail or any of these other email services, basically they can support millions or hundreds of millions possibly of different email clients, right? So they put that up onto the internet. The issue is with that client-server infrastructure, you had a lot of ability to manage configurations and to change things. So if you have a local Exchange server, you can do a lot of things to that local Exchange server. You can open firewall ports, you can close firewall ports, you can put group policies on there. You get a lot of configurations, a lot of good stuff. So the problem with the local infrastructure is that it's not always robust. I mean, somebody could come in, break into the building, and actually steal the server. You could have a fire that burns and melts the server. You could have a power supply fail and the server crashes. So there's a lot of things that can happen to the server, but you get a lot of ability to configure the server and make sure it does exactly what you need to do. The issue is then you go to web services. Web services are much more robust. I mean, they are just there. Again, think about it with Gmail. If Gmail goes down for hours, people lose their mind. It is front page news when Gmail goes down for hours. But you don't get a lot of configurations with that. That's the thing, is like it's a service. It provides very vanilla commodity type services, but it does it day in, day out, and so that's why it's a useful thing. After that, we then went to cloud infrastructure because people started looking at it and they started thinking, well, this stuff up on the cloud seems to work very well. Again, you think about it, Hotmail, Google, all this stuff now has been around 20 years. And it's like, that I know everybody's scared of it, but it actually is pretty robust and it's pretty nice, but we need more ability to configure things up there. We don't mind putting stuff up in the cloud, but again, we need to worry about more security things, we need to worry about more customization, we need to be able to create servers and services that specifically fit our needs, and that's where cloud infrastructure came in. So Amazon Web Services was the first one to really push this out, quite a while now, 10 years ago now. And so the idea is you now have storage services up on the cloud. You can now upload your virtual instances of servers up to the cloud. And the deal now is with that cloud infrastructure, so you can build an infrastructure. So before you had web services, right? Gmail gives you what Gmail gives you. If Google decides to give you something different, then you get something different. But basically, this is Gmail. Take it, leave it, we don't care, this is what it is. Well, with this cloud infrastructure, now what you could do is you could build out exactly what you want. If you want internet web services, if you want file sharing services, if you want email services, again, not only can you deploy a vanilla service, you can go up there and you can configure all this stuff to do however it is you want to do. Do you want to create a 10 instance cluster? You can do that. Basically what you can do is you can build out a real infrastructure, so multiple servers talking to each other, doing things based on events that happen other places. Again, that's the whole idea of the infrastructure. Now the problem though with this is nice. So now it allows you to build out this wonderful cloud infrastructure. It allows you to create really, really complicated things. But then the problem becomes you now have a cloud infrastructure. So you have a local infrastructure and it does what it does, and you have a cloud infrastructure and it does what it does, and for system administrators it's a bit of a headache because it is. That's the cloud and that's local, and trying to get them to tie into one system is a real headache. And what you have to understand from a system administrator's point of view is the more you can get all these systems to tie together, the easier it is to manage. That's the entire point of things like Active Directory. Why Active Directory is so valuable is you can go to one server, you can go to one console, you can make a modification on groups or security or anything else, and that replicates out to everything else on the network. Right? Imagine if you had 10,000 desktop computers, and in order to change a configuration, you would have to go to all 10,000 computers. Right? That would be horrible. So that's why we have Active Directory, so that you don't have to do that. The problem is in this world where you have the cloud infrastructure and the local infrastructure is essentially you have these two separate infrastructures. And when you have things that are completely separate, the problem is not only is it harder to maintain, but it's easier for things to fall through the cracks. You know, if there are if there are Apache servers up in your cloud infrastructure and your system administrators aren't thinking about them, they may stay up there for 4 or 5 or 6 years without getting patched. Right? Because they just don't think about it. It's not within the same infrastructure. So the question then became is how do we tie all this stuff together so that your local infrastructure and your cloud infrastructure becomes one infrastructure that you're looking at and that you can manage, and that's where we come to the whole idea of hybrid cloud infrastructure. So now that we know the past of how this infrastructure used to look like with the local infrastructure and then the web services and the cloud infrastructure, and why hybrid cloud infrastructure is so valuable, we needed to try to define what hybrid cloud infrastructure is. So this is a real problem that people have in the technology world, is they start throwing words around, hybrid cloud infrastructure, without really defining what they are talking about. So that's what I want to do here, kind of define what my viewpoint is of hybrid cloud infrastructure so that we are on the same page, because this is something that you have to think about. A lot of times people throw out the words, but just because you use a set of words and I use the same set of words doesn't mean what we're thinking about is the same thing, right? So what are we talking about, for me at least, when I'm thinking about hybrid cloud infrastructure? Well, the important thing that I think about with hybrid cloud infrastructure, the first point is that you need to have both virtualization in your cloud infrastructure and pure web services, right? So basically virtualization is, you know, you set up a virtual Windows 2012 server, right? You set up a virtual Ubuntu server, you set up a virtual whatever server. This is a virtual server that you configure up in the cloud. Basically looks like a virtual server you would have anywhere, right? So you have the ability to do virtual servers. The other thing though is that there should be simple pure web services. So if you look at something like Amazon where they have EC2, EC2 is a storage service. It is just storage. You connect your server to it, you dump data into it, it is just storage that is provided to you. You do not know what operating system allows that storage to operate. You don't understand the infrastructure that allows that storage to operate. All you know is you got storage. You got an EC2, you have your storage bucket, you dump data in, and it deals with it somehow. If you look at something like Microsoft Azure, one of the things I really like with Microsoft Azure, and something you guys should be thinking about, is they have their MS SQL service. This is very nice, right? So let's say you have an application that needs an MS SQL database. right? So you're sitting there, and normally what would happen is you would create a server of some sort, physical or virtual. You would install Microsoft SQL onto there. You would install, that you would then upload or whatever, configure the database, and therefore you have the database server. The problem with that is the operating system could get corrupted or could get a virus on there. It could get hacked. You could run into a lot of problems, right? And really all you want is that database service. You really don't care what operating system that database service runs on. You don't really care about the security as long as it is secure. You just need the database. So with Microsoft Azure, they actually have the MS SQL database service. So what you do is it's like many of the MySQL services that you use, where you just upload your database into that, and then you can just connect to that. So, whatever application it is that you're using, you point the application simply to their service, and then it functions. So the first thing that I would say, the first rule when we're talking about hybrid cloud infrastructure is not only should you be able to do virtual instances of servers, but it should also provide these other kind of like commodity services that you can just tap into and use, basically to allow you to simplify your life, simplify your infrastructure. The next thing when we're talking about hybrid cloud infrastructure, and something for you guys to be thinking about, a lot of you guys would not think about, especially if you're new, is that you can control your virtual network. Right? Okay, so you upload all of these instances for different virtual servers, different virtual machines, but the question is then how do they communicate with each other? Are they basically all essentially attached to a virtual switch and they can all just communicate to each other all willy-nilly? Right? Does that sound like a good idea from a security perspective? No. One of the best ways to secure your network is to secure your server is to create multi-level networks. Basically segment off your servers and different computers so that they can only talk to the servers that they're supposed to talk to. So basically what you can do, if you're able to control your virtual network, is you can segment, all of your web servers go over here and they have specific networking rules. All of your database servers, if you still need database servers, are over here and they have their networking rules. And then you can create rules that say web servers can talk to database servers on this specific port. Right, so that they can then communicate with each other. And the really nice part about this is that you can create really, really, really complicated networking schemes that are much better for if you're dealing with things like security and hacking, but are relatively easy. So most of these are graphical user interface things, and you just basically say these servers are allowed to talk to these servers on this port, and you're able to configure it, right? So that's an important thing to think about. Can you actually configure the virtual network up there, that virtual private cloud is normally called, in order to say what servers can communicate with other servers, what ports, what configurations, all that kind of stuff. The next thing that you need to be looking at, again, okay, so that's all virtual. So we got the virtual machines, we got the web services, all part of one package. You're able to control the network up there, part of one package. That's still all cloud. That's still all cloud. So now the next thing you need is a robust way to be able to connect that cloud infrastructure to your local infrastructure, right? Because once we start talking about your infrastructure, it needs to be robust. It should not be duct taped together. It should not have, basically the equivalent of bubble gum wrapped around it so it doesn't fall apart. You should have a robust solution. So if you're looking at companies such as Azure, if you're looking at companies such as AWS, and if you're looking at companies such as VMware that offer these hybrid solutions, or these hybrid cloud infrastructure solutions, you will see that they have their own ways for tying your local and your cloud infrastructure together very robustly. With Azure, not only can you do a VPN service, but they actually allow you to buy a dedicated connection. Not sure how much that costs. Probably costs you a lot of money, but you can actually have a dedicated connection from your local server room to their cloud infrastructure. Again, it's going to cost you a lot of money, but you can. Amazon has its own solutions. VMware has a very curious solution, but basically the idea is that this is something that is robust, that you really believe in, that you really trust, that you don't believe, again, is duct taped together. The other thing that you should be looking at for hybrid cloud infrastructure is, of course, Active Directory Connector. Right? So again, if you are in the startup world, you probably hate Active Directory. Active Directory, patosh, Eli, patosh. Who uses Active Directory anymore? That's so 1990. No, actually want to be 1999. That's so 2001. Well, here's the reality. Most of the Fortune 500 companies, and really any company over about, I don't know, 100 people is probably using Active Directory. So the reality is most real companies are using Active Directory. I know Facebook or whatever doesn't use Active Directory, but a lot of companies do. So again, one of the questions is Active Directory, that is your security service, your group policy objects, all that kind of stuff. So one of the things you want to be looking at with hybrid cloud infrastructure is there an Active Directory connector. So with Azure and with Amazon Web Services, there's actually an Active Directory connector. You install it into your local network, go Google how to do it, and that allows your local Active Directory servers to talk with your cloud servers so that that Active Directory service replicates, and so that those cloud servers are able to use the security policies and all those kind of things. So this is what we're looking for out of a hybrid cloud infrastructure, and the important thing to be thinking about, really why we're defining it this way, is that one, you get all the power of the cloud, you get the virtualization, you get the web services, you get all that kind of stuff, but that you're also tying it locally. So when the idea is that a system administrator essentially should be able to look at one screen, and that screen should be able to show the infrastructure. Right? You shouldn't have to pull up local infrastructure and then pull up cloud infrastructure and figure out how the hell all this thing works together. The idea is that they can look at one network diagram, and that diagram explains how everything works. And that is what we're really going for here. So now the question is, you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, well that seems interesting, Eli, that seems interesting, hybrid cloud infrastructure, I get the point, I get where you're going at. So why should we start doing hybrid cloud infrastructure now? Eli, our servers are working fine, our services are working fine, we've got this local thing going on, why should we start this migration? And the reality is why I would argue you should start this migration now, is that this is the future. If you talk with any technology professional that deals with budgeting and return on investment and all this kind of stuff, everybody knows most of our systems are going to be moving to the cloud. Now, for compliance reasons and all that kind of stuff, there are systems that will always have to remain local, but most systems will be moving to the cloud just for any number of reasons, for security reasons, for cost reasons, for ease of use reasons, for all of this kind of stuff. Basically, it's going to be moving up. So the nice part now with this whole hybrid cloud infrastructure is what you can start doing, and why you should start the migration now, is you can start building out this hybrid cloud infrastructure, frankly, while it doesn't matter, right? When is the worst time to do a migration? When is the absolute worst time to do a migration? The absolute worst time to do a migration is when it really matters and it needs to be done tomorrow. Right? The faster a migration needs to happen, and the more importance is put in that migration, the more expensive it is going to be, and most likely the more problems you're going to have. The longer you can make a migration, the better. Like, if I was going to have control over my migration cycles, I would want a 5-year migration cycle. I would be starting my migration now for a project that needed to be ended in 5 years, simply because it just makes life a lot easier, right? So if you start looking at this whole hybrid cloud infrastructure now, and you start moving things around, you can start finding out what works best for you. The important thing to understand about hybrid cloud infrastructure is that understanding this stuff isn't going to melt your brain. It is not horribly complicated, it's not tedious, it's not awful, but what you do have to realize is there are special ways you have to start thinking about cloud infrastructure. When you design things in the cloud, when you design infrastructure in the cloud, you can design it in entirely different ways than you can local, right? So if you're building out your network in the cloud, again, we're talking about virtual private clouds, we're talking about that virtualized networking, if you're local, and you're thinking about creating a multi-layer network, well, every switch is going to cost you money. Every router is going to cost you money, right? In a local world, let's say every router that you buy is going to cost you $500. So if you create some wacky, complicated network, that may cost you like, I don't know, $5,000 or $10,000 in routers, simply to be able to buy the networking equipment to do that. So what most people do is they simplify their network just to reduce cost. Well, when a virtual router essentially cost zero, you can now start creating very complicated networks up in the cloud in order to provide protection for your systems that don't cost you any more money. It requires you to do a lot more planning, but there's no physical hardware cost. Beyond that, all of the different service providers out there offer different things, and they offer different price points. So some service providers for hybrid cloud infrastructure, it's all based, what you're going to pay is based on how many minutes a day you use certain products. Other providers, they just do flat billing for the month. There are different services the different providers provide. Again, Microsoft Azure is very good for some things. AWS is very good for some things. VMware, vCloud Air is very good for some things. Which is best? As I always say, it depends on your situation. It depends upon your environment. And so, if you start migrating the hybrid cloud infrastructure now, and you move 1 or 2 or 3 servers up to the cloud, here's the deal. If you move 3 servers up to AWS, and you create your nice little hybrid cloud infrastructure, and then you find out, that really doesn't work how I thought it would. It's really not too hard to move 3 servers from AWS to Azure, or from Azure to VMware, right? It's like, okay, we put those 3 servers up there. We thought this is how the infrastructure was going to work. It didn't work how we thought. No big deal. We'll just move them. We'll either bring them back local, or we'll move them off to Azure. Right? No big deal, right? If you decide, again, in 2 or 3 years that hybrid cloud infrastructure is the way to go, and you migrate 100 servers up to AWS, it's a hell of a lot harder to start moving those things around, especially as those servers communicate with each other and you've got other things going on. That is just really horrible. So the idea, what I would argue with you guys for moving to hybrid cloud infrastructure now, is it allows you to go at a nice, slow, easy pace. You can start to look at your local infrastructure, and I know you have the Active Directory infrastructure, you have the Active Directory servers, and there's no way you're ever going to put those into the cloud. Fine, I'm not arguing with that. Okay, move those over. And this is our file server. There's no way we're going to put that into the cloud. Okay, that's fine. But then you look over, and I bet you have some piece of crap legacy project management software, right? And frankly, you hate this thing. You just want to drop kick that server. You hate the application, you hate Microsoft SQL, you hate that server. If you just put a bullet in it, you would. Right? So you look at that and you're like, well, what data does that really contain? And you think about it, it's just project management stuff, how many computers you purchased in a year or something like that. It's not social security numbers, it's not personally identifiable stuff, it's just all that crappy project management stuff that people need to keep track of. And so you look at it and you're like, you know what, that server is 6 years old anyway. We're going to have to replace the hardware soon anyway. It's a legacy app that we don't really care about. It doesn't really contain personal information anyway. You know what? What if we just migrate that up to Microsoft Azure's platform, right? We're going to have to buy new hardware. If we buy new hardware, it's going to cost $1,000, $2,000 for a new server. Plus, we're going to have to, pay for upgrades. Plus, you're going to have to pay manpower to do it. Or we can just now migrate it up to Azure and see how that goes, right? And so that's what you can start doing, is looking at your infrastructure and seeing what little things can you start migrating to the cloud, again, that aren't highly protected, right? So that's my thought on why you should be thinking about migrating to the hybrid cloud now, because then the cloud infrastructure is where everything is going. So the sooner you start to get your mind around it, the better. So we start talking about the hybrid cloud infrastructure. You're interested in it now. You're like, Eli, the computer guy, I like this hybrid cloud infrastructure. I'm on board. I want to go out. I want to buy this thing. Then the question is where do you buy it from? Who do you buy it from? So there are 3 major players right now with hybrid cloud infrastructure. Basically, you got AWS, Amazon Web Services. You have Microsoft Azure, obviously the big players. And then you have VMware, vCloud Air. Now the question comes up, Eli, which one should I buy? And again, that goes to whatever it is you need, whatever your budget is, whatever solution you're looking for. The big thing to understand with this type of infrastructure is that now you really are buying a product. You are buying into a vendor's solution. So you really have to think about what your needs are, and then take a look at what their offerings are and pick the right one, right? So Microsoft Azure is really good for certain things. AWS is very good for certain things. VMware is very good for certain things. What you pick depends on what your requirements are. For me personally, if I was just throwing out opinions here, if I'm just throwing out opinions, not telling you what to do, just tossing out some opinions, I would argue for Microsoft Azure is if you are heavily invested in the Microsoft stack, in the Microsoft environment, I would say go with Microsoft Azure. Again, something to be thinking about. Microsoft is the one that built Azure and build all the other Microsoft products, so they are going to be best situated to be able to support your products as you start to do these migrations. You know, if you've basically got, you know, Windows Server in 2012, Windows Server 2008, you're in a very just tightly controlled or whatever Microsoft environment, I would argue go with Microsoft Azure. Again, you've already bought into Microsoft. I mean, again, we are past the argument about whether you use Linux or Windows. You've already bought into Microsoft. So if you've already bought into Microsoft, just stay with Microsoft. I would argue the chances are they're going to be able to support you better. On the other hand, if you're in a company, again, like a web services company, you're really trying to push the limits. You have your employees can either use a Mac or can use Linux or can use Windows. You've got this whole, you know, weird cloudy type thing going on. Then you may want to look at Amazon Web Services. Again, Amazon Web Services is very good because they're very focused on this whole what's called SOA, service-oriented architecture. So they have a ton of services available to you. So if you don't really, you're not overly concerned about like the virtual machines, you just want to be able to pull from different services, then I would say you look at AWS. VMware, what VMware is very good for is basically being very good for being platform agnostic, whether you're Microsoft or whether you're Linux. Basically you build your virtual infrastructure and then you do whatever the hell you want with it. The nice part, I would argue, from taking a look at VMware is I think VMware is going to be better for compliance. So if you're looking for issues of, you know, you have HIPAA compliance, you have PCI compliance, you have other illegal compliance things, again, go talk to a lawyer. But if from my viewpoint, it seems as if VMware offers a better solution if you're worried about compliance. So these are some of the things that you need to be thinking about. And again, like I say, it's not simply what operating systems you're running. It's also things like what is your price point, what are your compliance issues, what are the other things that are going on around you to be thinking about. Because again, like I say, things like compliance, you don't think about compliance. I know a lot of you guys don't think about corporate compliance and all that kind of stuff, but it is very important as you start to move your infrastructure up to the cloud. It'll become more and more important as you go. But Eli, you say, but Eli, what about security? I mean, if I put all my stuff up on the cloud, I would never put my infrastructure on the cloud. Don't be ridiculous, Eli. How can you even think, Eli the computer, how can you even think about putting your valuable infrastructure up into the cloud? That's ridiculous. And that would be ridiculous if all of your infrastructure wasn't on the cloud already. This is one thing I never understand, right? So whenever we talk about the cloud, right? The first thing that always comes up, and you have all these little newbies like losing their minds, and they're all like, but security! If I don't have control over my physical machine, then somehow that is less secure. Well, here's a wake-up call, boys and girls. If your server is connected to a network that is connected to the internet, I do not care where that server is located, it is in fact on the cloud. Any server with a connection to the internet, by definition, is connected to the cloud. right? And so that's where we really come to with this argument. Like everybody's all worried about security in the cloud, and they somehow think, and there is, it's like that lizard brain thing. There's that lizard brain thing in your head that tells you if you can see the physical box, somehow it is more secure than is off in the cloud. Well, let me bust a whole bunch of bubbles here, right? Most of the time, having your servers located physically at your facility is far more insecure than putting them up in the cloud. There's a number of reasons for that. First, let's just talk about the physical reasons for that, right? If you have a physical server in your physical environment, it can suffer physical damage, right? Not just things like a power supply failing. If power supply fails, it goes out. You can have a fire, you can have a tornado, other emergency. If you're in some place like Baltimore where we have a high crime rate, somebody could literally go in and steal your server. You can have power failures, other things.'s a lot of physical damage that can happen to that server. When physical damage happens to that server, if it corrupts the hard drive and your backups haven't been done properly, you're screwed, right? Beyond that, one of the things nobody really wants to talk about is a lot of system administrators suck, right? Again, as I talk about in the real world, everybody wants to be a security professional. Eli, I want to be a cyber security professional. And as I keep saying, good cybersecurity is good system administration. Don't get me wrong, I mean, if you're really running a big enterprise or big company, I mean, you do need to have audits and you do need to have specialists in cybersecurity come in every once in a while. But realistically, when you see these major hacks in major companies, this isn't really a cybersecurity issue. It is a piss-poor system administration issue, right? I mean, it's like, you look at the hack, you look at what happened, and what comes to my mind is why the hell isn't that system administrator going to jail? I mean, that's gross negligence. If you look at what most of these hacks are, most of these hacks, it means you just want to shed a tear because it really is just really, really horrible administration. And so again, that's one of the things is we feel if the box is in front of us, it is somehow more secure. And we also feel that if we personally know the system administrator, that somehow bestows upon them good system administration skills. Which isn't always so, especially like I say, when you're dealing with small companies. You know, if you deal with a large company and you can pay your system administrators 150 grand a year, frankly, you're going to probably get pretty good system administrators. If you're with a small company and you're paying your system administrators $50,000 a year, just like anything else, you know, you get what you pay for. They may be fine system administrators, but do they understand all of the security issues? Are they up to date, right? A lot of people get their MCSEs and then they essentially stop learning. Right? I tell you guys, every day you should be learning, you know, you should be taking 30 minutes to learn something new. A lot of people don't. A lot of people get their certifications and then they go to work and they really don't learn a new thing for the next couple of years, right? So the reality is having the physical machine in your property, many times there's a danger to that. And then again, like I say, many times your system administrators are just really piss poor. If you look over to the cloud infrastructure, you then look at that and really how that cloud infrastructure is built out is if a power supply fails or if anything like that happens, your servers and your services basically stay up and running. As far as the administration and all that is concerned, again, when you're dealing with Microsoft can't just pay $150,000 for system admins, they can pay $250,000 for system admin, right? And so, you know, if you're Microsoft, I mean, you can pay a lot of money for security professionals and networking professionals, all these super smart people to make sure that infrastructure is up and running. Because remember, with Microsoft or with Amazon or any of that, if they suffer a major failure, they're talking about Amazon, I think last made like $4 or $5 billion profit, right? So if they have a major failure, they have to worry about $5 billion leaving. So they try to make sure all of this stuff is up and running and solid and secure. Obviously, nothing is ever perfect, but realistically, when it comes to this whole security thing, it's laughable. The idea that somehow your local systems are more safe than the cloud systems is just a joke. It just really isn't so. Because the big thing is, as I say, all systems are on the cloud. So when you have them local, you have all of the local risk Plus, you have the hacking risk and everything else. When you put it up in the cloud, not so much. So again, there are things to think about. You do need to build out your infrastructure properly, because if a hacker does get into your cloud infrastructure, it can have major problems. There was the startup company that basically failed overnight. The reason they failed overnight, somebody was able to hack into their AWS cloud infrastructure. They basically deleted their cloud infrastructure. Now here's a really stupid thing, and again, this goes back to administration. They were backing up their AWS cloud infrastructure into an AWS EC2 bucket or whatever, right? Some kind of AWS service. So when the hackers went in and deleted everything up on AWS, everything was gone, including the backups. But again, that is not Amazon's fault. That is not Amazon's fault. That is the dumb-ass system administrator's fault. They should have been backing up their AWS infrastructure into something local, or if nothing else, at least into another cloud infrastructure that the people couldn't get into. Again, that is where you have to look at. Is that the cloud's fault, or is that the dumbass administrator's fault? And I'll tell you, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the dumbass system administrator. So again, when you're thinking about this, the hybrid cloud infrastructure, again, also, when you're doing this and you're worried about security, move low-value servers and services up to the cloud first. But I tell you, everybody who looks at this from a business standpoint, the cloud is where we're going. So that's all there is for this class, Introduction to Hybrid Cloud Infrastructure. I hope you guys liked it. I know you guys have been waiting like a year. I can't even remember the last time I did a real class. I've been doing a lot of videos. I've had videos on therapy for tech professionals and loss and for tech professionals and all that kind of stuff, but I haven't had a class for a while. So I hope this class was pretty good for you. Again, I'm super hyper excited for hybrid cloud infrastructure. Again, there's not much of a downside. There is not much of a downside for hybrid cloud infrastructure. It's a really good idea. The only possible downside is, remember, you really have to think about what service providers you go with. Again, Azure is going to do what Azure does, AWS does what AWS, VMware does what VMware does, the rest, go out there and do a Google search. There may be other options. You really have to think about what you're doing. So the first thing is think about what you're doing. And then second, you really have to think about how you're designing that architecture, how you're dealing with security and all that kind of stuff. If you deal with those two issues, otherwise, I mean, this is the way to go. This is the way to go. As we start to have more and more of a remote workforce, as we have more of these web services, as we have all this stuff going on, again, just going to this hybrid cloud infrastructure model just makes a whole hell of a lot of sense, especially when you really start diving into it and you see how complicated you can make things. It is just absolutely awesome, absolutely awesome. And again, as I say, from like the security standpoint and all that, that argument was lost a long time ago. Again, I see so many people, you're like, I'll never go to the cloud. And you're like, dude, you're already on the cloud. You know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, you've been on the cloud for a long time now. This argument is over, right? So I would say go take a look at it. Definitely take a look at it. See how you can start migrating your infrastructure. Again, if you're a consultant, start looking at how you can migrate your client's infrastructure. Because the big thing to be thinking about that with this hybrid cloud infrastructure is, again, a lot of people don't want to go to web services. Understandably, Gmail doesn't do what I needed to do. Hosted Exchange doesn't need what I need to do. This doesn't do what I need to do. Well, you can go to them and you can say, I can build a custom service. I can build a custom server that will do exactly what you need to do, be able to put that up into the cloud. Your local server and services will be able to connect to that. Would that make sense for you? Yeah, it would, right? So this is the type of thing that I'd say that you need to be looking at. Again, do some research. It is really awesome. It is really cool. I give it a thumbs up. And so with that, as always, it was fun teaching this class, and look forward to seeing the next one. So if you did not know already, I've been trying to advertise this as much as possible. If you do want to talk to me one-on-one, I am now offering appointments either on Skype or using the web video service that we have at silicondiscourse.com. So if you need advice for professional development, career development, business development, and if you have questions about this whole hybrid cloud infrastructure thing and whether or not you should be looking at it or playing with it, I will be more than happy to talk to you. All you need to do is go to silicondiscourse.com, find the link for have a meeting with Eli the computer guy, click on that, and then go down to my little scheduling page and select what time works for you, and then we can have a nice little virtual meeting and I can talk to you guys about whatever you need to talk about. And like literally I talk to people about all kinds of stuff. Yesterday I was explaining how to diagram, voice over IP infrastructure. So that was one of the, like literally, I spent 30 minutes or an hour doing that yesterday. I helped somebody else, they're a college graduate, basically figure out whether or not they should go for an MBA or not. And another person, I was talking about starting a web design company. So like literally, that was just the appointments I had for one day. So we discussed all these things. Basically, if you look at my videos, you see all the things I've talked about in my videos, and I can talk about all of those to you for an hour at a time. So if you're interested in that, take a look at silicondiscourse.com.